Hello there, today I thought I would bring you another in my books that have ... series. It's been a while since I've done one of these because in all honesty I ran out of ideas for it. I had this idea that I'm going to film today quite a while ago, but I kind of didn't want to do it because I didn't want to do a negative video. So far all of the videos have been quite positive in terms of things like books that have changed my life, books that have surpassed my expectations. I didn't really want to do a negative one because I think it's quite a nice way to recommend books. However, I really like this series and you guys seem to really like it, so I wanted to do another one. So I thought today I would do books that have disappointed me. I mean, it's important to talk about books that haven't gone that well either, and I really enjoy hearing about books that people expect to love and then really do not, because I think it's most interesting when you're going into a book with expectations, why it lets you down, how it lets you down, especially in terms of being in a bookish community. Obviously books get certain hype, and some of these especially have had a certain level of hype and had therefore disappointed me as a result of that. So I'm going to talk about 5 of the books that have disappointed me. It was quite difficult to select books for this because obviously if I don't like a book or if it really lets me down, I give it away. So there's quite a niche selection of books here that are books that I still had on my shelf or that I could still bring to mind that had really disappointed me. Obviously they're not the most disappointing books I've ever read, especially given that I still own a lot of them. Obviously they're not the most disappointing, but they're the ones that sort of come to mind when I think about books that have really let me down recently in terms of my reading, or let me down in recent years. So the first one I don't actually have here, and that is Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. This is a book that I read quite a while ago now, probably about 5 years ago I want to say, and it was so frustrating. Now I don't think I need to tell you what Gone Girl is about because it's one of those books that it's been hyped and big for so long by now, but it's basically a kind of thriller mystery about a man who finds out that his wife has disappeared. It looks as though there's been a break-in, but the police soon discover that things aren't quite as they seem, and it goes from there. What really disappointed me about this book is that it was so strong in terms of the writing. For the first, I'd say about half, the writing was phenomenal. I just was blown away by the fact that it was such a fast-paced thriller, and yet it had really captured that literary, gentle language. It was so good. And then the end happened. Well, then the second half happened, more accurately, and it was shocking. I literally don't understand why there is a book in the world with an ending like this. It's ridiculous in every sense of the word. I think this book is the epitome of why you have to stay true to the world of your book. I think the ending in this book is so just unbelievable that it just surpasses the world of the book itself. It is honestly just, I just found it ludicrous, and it really frustrated me because it could have been an amazing book, it could have been a phenomenal book, and it wasn't. But obviously this is a book that is really widely loved. A lot of people adore it, even people who don't seem to like that genre adore it. For me, yeah, the ending, I just couldn't. So the ending really disappointed me, mainly as I say, because I was enjoying it so much until things took a drastic turn for the worse, and things just got too much. Then I want to talk about a book that I had expectations for purely because of hearing how much people loved it on BookTube, which is The Tidal Zone by Sarah Moss. This is a book that was huge on BookTube about 2 years ago, and literally everyone was just rave reviewing the hell out of this. It's basically a book that looks at, it's from the perspective of a single father called Adam, I want to say. Yeah, called Adam, and one of his daughters dies effectively. Her heart stops for a few seconds or something like that in school. It was about 2 years since I read this. The details are sketchy, but she dies for a brief period of time. They obviously revive her, and then the novel looks at her time in the hospital and how it affects Adam and how he feels about everything, and sort of the fears that he develops because of what's happened, and the sort of overpowering feeling of helplessness effectively, because you know you want to protect your children and he feels as though he can't because he doesn't know what has caused this incident. I found this really not great, and I was so disappointed by it because it was one of those books, like, I bought the nice posh edition with the matte cover and the pretty flaps and you know, everything, because I was so sure that I was going to adore this book. Like, it sounded right up my street. Everyone, as I say, everyone was raving about it. And then I read it and it was just so lackluster. I found it really lackluster. I felt as though this is one of those books that has used some really clever devices, but in a way they have undone it, because I remember feeling as though the book was really claustrophobic and we're very trapped in Adam's thoughts, which frustrated me because I wanted this to be more about his daughter. I feel like he was quite selfish. He didn't really think about how she was feeling about what had happened to her. We didn't really even get to know her as a character. She was kind of just a instigating factor almost. She was a 2D thing that something had happened to sort of cause the ripples of the novel, but she wasn't built up at all, which I thought was quite unbelievable, and I think that alone kind of undid this book for me. Also, Adam, as I say, it was just very claustrophobic in his head, and I think for part that is, as I say, quite a clever device, because obviously that's how he was feeling. He was very in his head, and it was kind of suffocating him, this helplessness. But yeah, as a book, I was not inclined to pick it up at all. I found it quite bland, and yeah, as I say, I think if the daughter had been built up a little bit more, but it seemed very much to me as though Sarah Moss had just kind of had this initial idea of like, oh, what if that happened to somebody, and kind of just stuck it in the novel and then looked at the ripples rather than looking at the incident itself. I don't know. I felt like it was not great, I'm going to be honest. It's one that I would like to reread, because I did read it at a time when I wasn't paying the most attention. I wasn't in the biggest mood for reading, but ultimately I think I will probably feel the same as I did the first time I read it. It just didn't float my boat, sadly. Then I have got The Less Than Perfect Legend of Donna Creosote by Dan Micklethwaite. Now this I read for my Paddling in Independent Publisher series. If I'm honest, I've only still got it because I haven't been giving books away at the moment, because I am preparing to move, but as soon as I saw this on my shelf, I thought it was a good one to include, because this is a book which promises so much for so many book lovers and it just doesn't really deliver. So this is effectively a book about a woman who, it kind of, from the blurb, it sounds a bit like magical realism, but it's not. She's very good at, I suppose, avoidance. She almost lives as though she's in her books. So she loves reading, and she effectively just hides within the story worlds of her books. She doesn't face up to her life and the fact that she's got, you know, probably an alcohol problem. She's kind of depressed, and she's not a great person, to be honest. She does pretty shitty things. But she effectively just escapes into the story world. She pretty much just covers her apartment with pages. So she's got like a bed made of books, and she just covers the floor in books, and the pages are all on the walls. And yeah, it just is basically about the love of reading and stuff. Admittedly, I liked this to start with. I could really relate with Donna Creosote. I really felt for her, the way that, you know, she was just escaping into these books. But then it just gets a bit crazy. Like, there are sections, this is where it could have done with being magical realism, but it's not. She basically just goes a bit crazy, and if I recall rightly, she dresses up as a knight and she goes out and is like in the persona of this knight, and it just gets a bit stupid. And ultimately the problem with this book is that Donna Creosote is not a great person, as she does some bad things and there's no progression there, there's no development. She doesn't realise that, you know, the life she's living probably isn't great. She doesn't realise that she's not the greatest person. She doesn't realise that, you know, she needs to make changes. There's no onward march for this book. It's kind of a little bit weird, and then it ends. So it was really disappointing, because I really thought it was going to be so good. I thought it was going to be fantastic, but as I say, I kind of thought it was going to be a bit magical realism-y. I think the problem is that there's kind of magical elements that could have been in there, but they're actually just real, so it doesn't really have the same impact as it would have if it wasn't real, and it just ends up being a bit bizarre and unbelievable. I think my main feeling after reading this was that it was kind of like a manuscript that hadn't really been crafted into a novel. So it was really, really bizarre read, and I was just, yeah, I didn't enjoy it at all. Then I have got Jamaica Inn by Daphne du Maurier. This is a more recent read for me. I read this after going to visit the real Jamaica Inn on my holiday to Cornwall 2 months ago. I hated this book. I think hate is a fair word, because I found the reading process quite painful, if I'm completely honest. This looks at basically a woman who, her mother dies. She ends up going to live with her aunt in Jamaica Inn, which is a kind of traders inn on the sort of Bodmin moors kind of. It's really out of the way. The best thing about this was the fact that I had been to see the real Jamaica Inn, so I could really picture, and it is really in a desolate kind of situation, and it's quite a spooky place. But this basically looks at this girl who, as I say, she goes to stay with her aunt. She realises that things aren't right, and her aunt's husband, Joss, ends up being involved in some really dodgy dealings, and she gets involved in it, and basically it goes from there. This sounds like it's going to be good, and actually I've just realised on the front it says a first-rate page turner. I could say that that quote could not be more inaccurate if it tried. This book was so bland. I didn't care. I wasn't bothered about the story at all. It was so boring. I haven't done this in years. I ended up skipping pages, and to be honest, I skipped 50 pages at the end, and I didn't actually miss anything. So yeah, I really, really didn't like this, and I think the main reason this was disappointing was because Daphne du Maurier is obviously a really respected and loved writer, and also I adored her book Rebecca, which is the only other proper full-length Daphne du Maurier I have read. But since reading this one and The Birds and Other Stories, I'd say that both of them bored me quite badly. So I don't actually think I like Daphne du Maurier, I think I just like Rebecca. Yeah, so this was a real disappointment because I was expecting to love it and I was really excited to read it after going there, and it just fell so flat with me, it was crazy. Then finally, I've got a really recent read for me, which is Elmit by Fiona Mosley. Now, I won't say too much about this because I've reviewed this both on my blog and I did this in my wrap-up that's just gone. So if you want to know my thoughts in depth, you can check both of those platforms out. This book was not what I wanted it to be. So it's a debut novel that was shortlisted for the Man Booker and longlisted for the Women's Prize. On the back of that alone, you would expect it to be phenomenal. Also, the fact that everybody seems to love it. Everybody I've seen review it was like, it's gorgeous, it's amazing. Meh. It was, I'd say it was less disappointing than the other books in this list because it didn't enrage me in any way, and I think the other books kind of enraged me. This didn't enrage me, it was fine. It was a debut novel, and it was quite a nicely written debut novel, but nice is not really the kind of word that I would like to describe a book that I'm really expecting big things from. It was fine. It was a bit boring. I would say that nothing really happens. I'd also say this is a book that doesn't really know what it wants to be. So predominantly this follows a boy called Daniel who is living a kind of really sheltered and cabin in the woods-esque type life with his dad and his sister Kathy. And it basically looks at things like how their gender identities are formed because of the fact that they are living outside of society. It also focuses a lot on the idea of land ownership, and basically the main plot is that this man who owns their land, Mr. Price, is trying to get them off of it, or basically bribing them to do dodgy dealings for him in order to allow them to stay on his land. As you can probably guess from that description, this really is a book that's just a bit all over the place. It's kind of a book that doesn't have much plot, but that doesn't bother me. I don't look for plot-heavy books. The problem with this book is that it doesn't have theme, and you can't write a book without theme. You need to know what you're trying to say. And I think Fiona Mosley has got these half-formed ideas about what she wants to talk about, but they're kind of just, they're not really delved into. It's quite a short novel. I mean, it looks medium, but when you actually open it up, there is like no writing to a page. It's kind of like Ali Smith-esque, really large writing and really wide margins. So actually I read this in probably 3 hours. I feel like it could have either been longer or it could have just honed what it was trying to say. I feel like it was a book that didn't really ultimately leave much of a mark because it didn't it didn't get to the point, it didn't have much point, I don't know, it was lacking, it was really lacking. I think it's a shame, because it's, as I say, it's a perfectly fine debut, and I think off the back of it I probably would look out for Fiona Mosley in the future, because I think she's quite atmospheric and she obviously likes quite dark themes, which I like, and there's also a real Steinbeck-esque feeling in the setting, in the situation in here, but it is a debut, and I think, as I said in my review, the fact that it's been so hyped and shortlisted for things and long-listed for things, it sets you up to expect a lot, and I think this book is therefore kind of destined for a fall, in my opinion. Certainly since speaking out about the way that I felt about this book, a lot of people have said that they felt the same, and that they were kind of baffled about the general love for this book. So it's good to know that I'm not alone, for one. But yeah, it was a disappointment for me. I was really expecting a lot. In fact, I was expecting so much from this that I have been avoiding picking it up from the library for a few months, because I thought that I would love it enough to own my own copy. Luckily, in the end, I did get it out from the library, because I thought if I loved it that much, I could buy a copy. I definitely won't be buying a copy, and I'm very glad that I didn't end up spending money on this. As I say, I'd look out for her, but yeah, this book in itself, I found a real disappointment. So there we go. As I say, I was skeptical of doing a negative video for this, and I'm sorry if everyone found this too negative. I've tried to be constructive, but yeah, I think it's important to talk about the books we don't like as well. Please let me know down below if you've had any really disappointing books recently, and I will see you next time. Bye!